What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Lakers Outsiders podcast. We are back. Took a little vacation, not as long as one as we thought was going to happen. The NBA apparently had other plans. They're like, the Lakers won the championship. Let's not let them enjoy a full offseason. Let's just make them go right back to work. But we are back. We got a nice little break. Got to enjoy the title a little bit. I am Gary Kester, your host, with you as always. Joined again today by Hani Ahmadian. Hani, the vacation probably wasn't long enough, but hey, it's good to see your face again.
Hey, thanks. You too, pal. First of all, I love the fact that there's sunlight outside while I'm talking to you for the first time ever. I also love that we're coming back to this on a very casual Sunday where no news of any note happened at all, especially regarding the Lakers.
Yeah, what are we going to talk about? I mean, the Lakers, they're never in headlines. They never, do any crazy offseason moves or anything. So
yeah, it's a real downer for our show and our website that we just never have anything to talk about.
Isn't it just so weird though? Like we're middle of November and we're talking about, free agency and well, not so much the draft anymore, which we'll talk about in a sec, but man, weird times. But hey, so it does feel somewhat normal. We're talking about the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers and making some moves. They're not standing pat. They're not going to just run it back with the same lineup as we learned today. So let's dive in. Hani, what we heard today, the Lakers are making a move that sounds like will be official tomorrow, Monday, I guess I should say, depending on when you're listening to this. But the Lakers are reportedly trading Danny Green and the 28th pick in Wednesday's NBA draft to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Dennis Schroder. This is an interesting move, one that's I think kind of had mixed reviews by fans, as everything always does. But what are your thoughts on this trade? I know you're just from knowing you personally, your opinions on Schroder seem to kind of go back and forth a little bit. So he's kind of a polarizing figure.
I'll say this first. My very, very first reaction was, hell yes, I don't have to even pretend to care about the draft. On one side, because people know I do not really care about the draft ever. That said, yes, my opinions on Schroder, he is polarizing for I think NBA fans in general, and he is very polarizing for me specifically. I think he is a very, very talented player and somebody who had a career year last year, had an incredible year, was arguably, he didn't win Sixth Man of the Year, but a lot of people thought that he should have won it. He was a big key to the Thunder being as good as they were, surprisingly so. He played in these 3-guard lineups with Chris Paul and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander that were just kind of wrecking the league all year long. So he obviously has a lot of talent, especially offensively. He can score the ball. He's a good shooter. He can, run your pick and rolls, run your offense. So from that perspective, I definitely get the move for the Lakers because that's something they didn't really have. They didn't have that sort of secondary playmaker to LeBron, other than Rondo, which, as we've kind of learned, it seems likely that they're not going to have him next year. Schroder is at least somebody that I guess you would expect to be better during the regular season to help you out there and hopefully to keep contributing in the playoffs as well. And maybe in more sustainable ways, especially with his shooting. Nobody really expected Rondo to always be shooting 50% from three in the playoffs, although I'm never going to doubt him ever again, so maybe he will. My concern about this move comes from, the difference between Danny Green and Schroder defensively, I think, is massive. There's just a giant chasm in between those guys. Danny, I think he's older. We don't really know how injuries have affected him, but he obviously wasn't at his best in the playoffs. And even defensively, he's I think taken a step back in recent years. But as a team defender, he's still one of the best in the league, in my opinion, and he's a good option on the perimeter against 2 guards and 3 guards. Schroder is not a good defender. He's certainly not good enough to put on bigger guys, and even as a point guard defender, he's not very good. So I am concerned about that part of it. And I think, my ultimate feelings towards this trade are going to rely a lot on what the Lakers do in free agency to kind of shore up that wing depth that they suddenly really need to do with Danny not here anymore.
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts with this trade. One is, some of them are kind of echoing the same things that you were talking about. First thing was the defensive drop off is pretty substantial, because as much as a lot of fans did not like Danny Green this year, you really just can't deny his impact defensively. He usually got him and KCP kind of tag team like the main defensive assignment on the perimeter. Depending on if it was a point guard, if it was a wing, whatever it was. And that's huge because this team last year, they weren't a bad offensive team by any means, but they won with their defense. When they played to their best ability defensively, they were absolutely suffocating. And we saw it in that Game 6 against the Heat in the NBA Finals that clinched the title. They were just swarming. They were just the pressure, the length, the athleticism, all that stuff. They were just too much for teams to handle in a 7-game series. So you definitely lose a lot of that with Danny Green and some of the impending free agents that the Lakers need to re-sign. So that was one thing that jumped out, was the drop-off defensively is pretty substantial. But from what we've seen this offseason with all these rumors and guys that they've been interested in, I think it's pretty apparent that the Lakers, knowing that this is such a short offseason, it's such a short turnaround. I mean, they won the title on October 11th, and the season's going to tip off December 22nd. So, I mean, less than 2.5 months for an offseason. I know LeBron's not happy about it. And it puts teams like the Lakers and the Heat at a disadvantage because they played, much longer into the season. And a lot of these teams that didn't even make the playoffs have been off for, how long now? Basically since March.
So, yeah, it's going to be 9 months by the time the season starts.
Yeah, so the Lakers are definitely going to be at a disadvantage with some of that, with some of those guys that they bring back, having less rest time, less recovery time in the offseason. But I think the Lakers have made an emphasis on getting the type of player that can help lighten the burden on LeBron as the playmaker. Rondo obviously did that in the postseason. We've seen reports that the Lakers are kind of expecting that he's not going to be back because his performance in the playoffs is probably going to get him some more money elsewhere, which isn't surprising. But I also think that the Lakers, I don't want to say maybe aren't going to emphasize the regular season as much, but I think they wanted to lighten the load for LeBron and AD during the regular season, given it is going to be, they're shooting for 72 games. And it's a quick turnaround. So, and I feel like the games are going to be fairly jam-packed. So, I think, from the names we've seen, Schroder, Derozan, so on and so forth, and we'll talk about Derozan in a minute, but I think they've made a pretty big emphasis that we need a shot in the arm offensively. We need a guy that can come in and be that spark. And Schroder, like you said, Honey, there's a very strong case that he could have been 6th man of the year last year. So he's a very good player. And I mean, the upside too is like, if it doesn't work out, he's on the same contract as Danny Green, where he's got 1 year, $15 million, which is kind of why I think Danny Green, and I wouldn't be surprised if Danny Green honestly wanted to change of scenery. I think obviously he had fun this year because he was on a good team. They won a title, but I think it was a very stressful year for him as well, with all the stuff that he kind of dealt with off the court. So, I mean, I think it's a good trade though. I really do. I like Schroder. I was impressed with him in the Rockets series offensively. You're not getting a ton from him defensively, but I think the Lakers can make some additions around the roster that can kind of erase some of those issues defensively that Schroder is going to have. Plus, I don't know if he starts or not. I would assume they're going to bring back KCP. Because he's been really good for them. He's a clutch client and all that stuff. So I don't know if it's a 1-year deal or a multi-year deal, but I do like this trade. I do. I am going to be happy that we'll get a guy that essentially plays that backup point guard role behind LeBron. When LeBron goes to the bench, we can bring in Schroder, and he's not going to coast. Because as good as Rondo was at various points of the playoff run, you could tell during the regular season that guy he coasts. He just coasts and saves his legs for the playoffs. And hey, it worked. I'll give him credit for that. But this is going to be one of those seasons with such a short offseason that you're going to have guys that can step up in the regular season and and get it done during the regular season as well. So I think they can pair Schroder with some guys, maybe hide him a little bit when he's on the court. I mean, you can put him out there with Alex Caruso. You can put him out there with KCP. That'll take the tough backcourt assignment, and you can kind of hide him a little bit as we see that with other teams around the league. So I think they can make it work. I like the trade. I think it's I'm glad to see that the Lakers are not standing pat, because a lot of people were saying, oh, just run it back. I think that's how teams don't repeat, is if you get content and you just try and run it back. You got to add some new wrinkles here and there and really mix it up. Because if you run the same team 2 years in a row, teams are going to eventually probably figure you out, especially when they have a whole offseason to adjust to what you do, which is, I think, what a lot of teams are going to try and do with the Lakers, because the Lakers kind of broke the mold a little bit with how they constructed their roster last year. So yeah, I'm a fan of the trade, and I'm excited to see what Schroder can bring to the Lakers. And I'm sad to see Danny Green go. I was excited to get him finally. I've been pounding the table on trying to get that guy for years. But sad to see him go. Wish him the best. Thank him for, assuming this trade goes through, thank him for what he did for this team this year and helping them get a championship. But I'm excited for Schroder to come in.
Yeah, I think on the point about Danny, he went through a lot of crap, especially in the playoffs. A lot of it was very unfair. I think a lot of it was fair as well. He definitely was not at his best and not what we expected from a guy who obviously has had a lot of postseason success in his career. But he genuinely was just a great pro the entire time. And, even off the court, I think I really loved hearing him being so genuine about, his mental health issues and mental health issues around the league during the bubble. And also, his consistent talking points about the social justice issues that were obviously really important to all NBA players, throughout the bubble after the restart. So I do just want to echo that sentiment that, it sucks that he's leaving after a year, even if we consider Schroder potentially an upgrade over him. But it was really awesome to have Danny Green on the Lakers for a year. I don't think we can really understate. Well, I'll reword that. I think it does get understated a lot what his contribution to this team meant, because I think even if his numbers weren't necessarily amazing and he wasn't shooting the ball well, but I think his team defense and just the gravity of his reputation as a shooter were huge for the Lakers. And I don't think it's going to be easy to replace him in free agency. I think it's possible, but I don't think it's going to be easy. But yeah, I will say that I think my feelings towards this trade, since thinking about it in the morning, I think they have swayed more on the positive side. I think there's a lot of risk involved in it, because Schroder is a type of player that, that the pendulum swings pretty far back and forth. The last 4 years, he's been averaging pretty great numbers. He's basically like a 19 and 5 point guard, or like an 18 and 5 point guard, which is, great numbers for somebody that's going to be coming off the bench for the Lakers and isn't going to have, a whole lot of responsibility. And he obviously shores up, a big need for them in terms of the playmaking department outside of LeBron. But he does have those moments where you're wondering what kind of decisions he's making.
Yeah.
And even in that series against the Rockets, where nobody really expected the Thunder to play them so close, and they were basically a shot away from beating them in the first round. And I think Schroder had a really good series, like you mentioned, but there were some moments where I was watching those games and I'm like, what is this man doing? Like, some of the decision making, I think, is a problem. And hopefully in a team that has LeBron James and, his responsibility for Schroder comes down even, I think, lower than it was next to Chris Paul. I think you'll see a little bit of an improvement in that department, but they are going to have to be able to kind of coach around him and play around him and figure out ways to minimize, the negative aspects of his game, which, to the Lakers' credit and to Frank Vogel's credit, they did that quite well with a lot of players last year. So I'm a lot more optimistic, I think, than I was immediately after the trade happened or was reported to happen.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty positive about it and I'm optimistic about it, but yeah, I mixed emotions. I mean, especially as a Laker fan and a North Carolina fan, it was really cool to see Danny Green win a college national championship with North Carolina back in '09, and then win an NBA championship with the Lakers. That was pretty cool. But good dude, really good dude, and wish him nothing but the best. Kind of sad to see him go, but I'm excited to see what Schroder can do in this offense because I think he's kind of something that the Lakers definitely needed, especially in the regular season. And I would anticipate he can still perform in the playoffs, especially, I mean, playing off of LeBron and AD. That makes guys' lives much easier on the court. So excited for that. But let's talk about some other rumors that we've heard. First, DeMar DeRozan. The Lakers were reportedly going after him, and I had heard kind of similar things, and I was kind of surprised to hear that. But yeah, the reported trade I think was Kyle Kuzma, first round pick, and Danny Green for DeMar DeRozan. That certainly had mixed opinions on it. DeRozan's a very polarizing player as well. Very talented player, like a 20-point scorer, but does it in a way that I think kind of rubs people the wrong way. What were your thoughts on this potential trade, which is essentially probably out the window now?
Yeah. I felt like this was turned upside down from like whatever it was 4 years ago when DeRozan was a free agent. And, the Lakers had obviously struggled to get, any star players after Kobe had retired. And it seemed like I felt at the time that I was one of very few people saying, you know what, if DeRozan would sign with the Lakers, sign him because he's an all-star level player. He's not amazing. He's flawed. He's probably not ever going to be a number one, maybe not even a number two on a title-winning team, but you need those kind of guys to build franchise. It felt like everybody was against this. And then as soon as this rumor comes out, I was like, well, I don't really see the fit here. I don't understand why you would want DeRozan. And it felt like everybody wanted DeRozan. So I was very confused by this. I'm a big DeMar DeRozan fan in terms of just his play style and who he is.
That's right, because anybody that's new to this pod, this stream, Honey is a Toronto Raptors fan. So
yes, correct, obviously.
As he's wearing his Lakers shirt.
But yeah, I'm a big DeRozan fan in general, but the fit, it was really hard for me to see how he would work with LeBron and Anthony Davis. He's a guy who needs the ball in his hands to be, a good contributor. I think he's not really an off-ball threat, partially because he is not good at shooting threes and he does not take them. I feel like there was a stretch this season where he went like 3 months without taking a three-pointer. That's probably an exaggeration, but I don't think it's that far off. And defensively, he is not good at all. So to me, it was kind of an odd fit in that sense. Talent-wise, yes, he'd be an upgrade over Danny Green. He'd be an upgrade over Kyle Kuzma, and he'd be an upgrade over whoever the Lakers would have picked at 28. And he'd be an upgrade over all three of them combined, I think. But fit-wise, I think people sometimes don't really consider how the pieces of the puzzle mesh together as much as they think of how shiny the actual pieces of the puzzle are. And, DeMar DeRozan is a much shinier piece than Danny Green or Kyle Kuzma, but I don't think he would have ever really fit or meshed well with the pieces on the team. So I was really concerned about that rumor. That was something that I really did not want the Lakers to do, as much as I love DeMar and as much as it would have been really sweet to see him potentially win a title with the Lakers and his hometown team. It just, I don't know, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me.
On the surface, my initial reaction was kind of, yeah, it's a super clunky fit because of his play style, as talented of a player as he is, because around LeBron and AD, and a big reason why the Lakers were at their best with Anthony Davis at the 5 with essentially a stretch 4, whether it was Markieff Morris or Kyle Kuzma or whoever, was because of the spacing that it allowed them to have offensively, and it allowed LeBron to really attack and get into the paint and create for others and get all the way to the rim for himself and so on and so forth. So with DeRozan, you lose a lot of that spacing because he does not have a reputation as a three-point shooter. Like you said, he does not take them very often. He's more of a kind of mid-range, almost like a two-level scorer. Can get to the bucket and finish, but also a pretty good mid-range type of guy. So the fit's super clunky. I would have been totally fine with it, in all honesty, because I wouldn't be surprised to see Kyle Kuzma get traded this offseason because the Lakers get one more year on his rookie deal before they have to pay him. And I don't know. Unless I see a change with him this year, I just don't think paying him probably what somebody is going to be willing to pay him is a smart move. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the Lakers try and move on from him. But I think DeRozan's such a talented player that you can work around it and you can figure out mix and match ways that you can utilize his skill set. I don't know if it's, playing him more minutes with like the second unit with LeBron on the bench, especially during the regular season, since I think they're going to load manage LeBron and AD a lot more this year. And he's a 20-point scorer. So I don't know. I trust Frank Vogel. I trust this staff to figure something like that out. So I was kind of all for it because I figured, that's a guy that can fill it up, and this team could, use a punch offensively. And so I was okay with it. As clunky of a fit on the surface as it might be, I think there's ways to work around it. But it's kind of a moot point now, unless we see some drastic change, because you kind of need Danny Green's salary to make a move for DeMar DeRozan, and now Green is going to OKC. So unless that somehow gets facilitated as some 3 or 4 team trade, which I don't anticipate happening, it's kind of a moot point. But it was very interesting, and it kind of, I think, goes back to what I was saying earlier about just them looking for guys that can provide an offensive punch to really help out LeBron and AD, so that they're not as taxed physically throughout the regular season, with given the circumstances of the 2-month off season, and trying to just kind of lighten the load for those guys. So I think it's been a big point of emphasis. I don't think the Lakers are done by any means after the Schroder trade. I think that Pelinka's going to be aggressive, man. I just like how he's kind of scoured the market a little bit and seen what's out there. And I like it. I like being aggressive. I like trying to add to your core and building a title team and making them even better, and not standing pat and getting satisfied or content with your roster. So I like what we've seen so far. But another guy that the Lakers are reportedly interested in to possibly replace Danny Green is Wesley Matthews. And this is a guy that you've been really pounding the table for quite some time, not just because of his good looks, but
mostly though.
Yeah. Hani will be the first one to admit that Wes Matthews is a very handsome fellow. But but yeah, he's a guy that I think that the Lakers will be looking at, because they're going to need wing defenders, right? Like the 3-and-D guys. If Danny Green is gone, somebody's got to fill that role. And I don't know if it's one player that does it or if it's a committee type approach where they just have multiple guys that they can fit in there. What are your thoughts on Wesley Matthews? Obviously not the player he used to be. I mean, these guys do get older. He's been in the league a while. Has been a quality player for quite some time. Seems to be differing opinions on his stint with the Bucks last year, but he's definitely an interesting fit if the Lakers do go that route.
Yeah. Wesley Matthews is one of a few NBA players, I think, that have come back from an Achilles tear and still been pretty great at what they do. He's obviously not really the level that sorry. I just got distracted because I looked up and I saw a comment saying that they thought this was Jake and Amir in the thumbnail, and that made me laugh. Anyway, I don't think he's the type of player that he was in Portland early on in his career, where he was kind of taking guys off the bounce a little bit more, getting to the rim. But as a 3-point shooter, he's pretty solid, basically at the same level as Danny Green was last year. And as a defender, he's still pretty great. He can guard ones, twos, and threes. I think even if you get him in the post against a mismatch, I think he's one of the better guards in the league at kind of defending in those situations. The Lakers obviously have a need for kind of bigger wings. He's not really a big wing. He's only 6'4", but he is a pretty strong, bulky dude, and I think that kind of offsets, whatever issues you might have with, his size otherwise. So I love the fit. I think he's a guy that can plug in easily, play, 15, 20 minutes a night and, hit a couple of big threes a game and give you good defense. He's not going to be, a big piece that is really kind of the reason why your team is put over the top or anything like that. But I think he's a type of player that the Lakers really need. And, like you mentioned, I don't think it's going to be one player necessarily coming in. I don't even want to say giving Danny's production, because I think numbers wise, Danny Green wasn't producing like crazy stats or anything. He wasn't putting up 15 points a night. And I think Wesley Matthews basically averaged the same numbers as he did last year. But in terms of his impact, I don't think Wesley is as good of a, like team defender. I don't think he's as great of a transition defender as Danny Green is. But I think him plus another wing piece can give you that sort of same impact as Danny Green. And I think that's what the Lakers should be looking for.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't think him alone is going to replace the void left by Danny Green. I think him plus somebody else can potentially do that. But I think, and that's a big thing, is the Lakers are paying, we're paying Danny Green $15 million a year. So it's a pretty, sizable salary to fill that role. Whereas if you're replacing him with Wesley Matthews, for example, you're doing it for, Wesley Matthews played on the veteran minimum last year for a little over $2 million. So ideally, if you get him for the veteran minimum, then yeah, I think that's a great addition to this team. I don't think he alone replaces Danny Green, but I think he can be a quality addition that fills some of the void, and really that's all you could ask for with a veteran minimum signing. 3-point shooting dropped a little bit for him last year, shot 36%, but career 3-point shooter at 38%. If, even 36%, is probably good enough to get you minutes with this team, especially if you can still defend at a decent level out on the wing. So I think he would be a pretty solid fit. We'll have to see if that materializes further than just the reports that we've seen. But the Lakers definitely, I think, identify the need to fill that 3-and-D wing role, or get multiple of those guys now that Danny Green is gone, because that was kind of a question mark going into last season, was their depth on the wing, and luckily they found ways around that, and guys stepped up and played well, and you had Green, you had Kuzma, you had LeBron. A number of guys really stepped up and filled that role defensively and offensively. But yeah, I think they're going to need, if they do get Wes Matthews, they're still going to need one or maybe two more wing guys that can potentially be a 3-and-D type of threat. And I think Wes Matthews would be a good start. I really do. So I'd be on board with that for sure. I think people would just have to temper their expectations a little bit, that he's not how he was in his prime, where he was a very, very good wing defender and a 3-and-D guy. He's probably going to give you more flashes of that, and not as consistent defensively and as a shooter, but he'll definitely have his moments where I think he does both very well, and maybe that's all the team needs. So we'll have to see, but that's definitely something, an area of need for the Lakers is filling out those spots on the wing. They do have some question marks as well with their front court, with their bigs. JaVale McGee, I think he has a player option, correct?
Yeah.
You're my JaVale McGee expert, being a fellow Nevada alum. So I always got to come to you for that. But we don't really know exactly what's going on with some of these player options and team options and stuff like that around the league. It's such a weird offseason. We kind of have a sense that Avery Bradley might opt out. He switched agencies, I think, or representation, and it sounds like he was definitely considering opting out, which would be another piece that the Lakers would probably need to replace, because they obviously didn't have him in the playoffs, but he was a valuable member of the team during the regular season. Well, we've seen a couple names mentioned as possibilities. The Lakers will obviously have to address their free agents in Dwight Howard and JaVale McGee, but we've seen some other guys like Serge Ibaka and Danilo Gallinari as potential maybe mid-level exception type guys. What are your thoughts on a couple of those guys that we've been hearing that the Lakers might be going after?
I think I kind of feel the same way I do about them as I do Schroder, and that I see the fit and I see a lot of scenarios where they would succeed, but I also think there is some risk to either of those guys. Gallinari, you're kind of talking about the same issues where he's a great scorer, 3-level scorer. He's good at getting to the rim, getting to the free throw line. He can shoot. He can really create his own shot as well, but not a great defender. And has had some injury concerns in the past, although he will tell you that that's not an issue. So you kind of wonder about that fit. Ibaka, I think, fits just amazingly. He can play center or power forward. He can play next to AD or as the sole center on the floor. He can spread the floor. He can bang down low, get rebounds, great defender, all of that. My one concern with Ibaka, I think, is he's going to be expensive. I don't know if the mid-level is even going to be enough to get him.
Not with that
but
attitude.
Even if it is enough, then my issue is, well, you're spending the entire mid-level to get a big man when you know your team is usually at its best with Anthony Davis playing center anyway.
Yeah.
So now you're spending basically your entire spending power this offseason, other than veteran minimums, on that position that you might not even really use in the playoffs. And now you're worried about how you're going to get the help you need on getting, wing defense and 3-point shooters and stuff like that without having that spending power. Obviously, the Lakers are so good that, there are going to be players that might be willing to take less and take the better minimum to come lash onto the team and potentially win a ring. But it is a little bit more of a risky proposition for me. So personally, I'm not a huge fan of using that money on a big man. But Ibaka would be the one guy that I would really consider it on because he's just such a great fit and such a great, talent-wise upgrade over the centers that the Lakers had this year.
Yeah, I'd be happy with either guy, really. I mean, I've always been a big fan of Gallo just because he's a very unique talent, being, 6'10", being kind of like that guy that can play, the three, basically out on the perimeter a little bit, but he's also, the size of a big guy. So it's just he's kind of a tough cover for a lot of defenses because if you put a smaller guy on him to stay in front of him, he can shoot over the top. But if you put a big guy on him, he goes around him. So he's a guy I've been intrigued by, and it seems like he's almost campaigning for the Lakers to sign him on Twitter. Sends the old congratulatory tweet towards the Lakers. That was something I don't think I've seen many players do.
He's at least very explicitly signaling that he's not going to be in OKC. Like that part is pretty certain.
Yeah. Well, who knows what OKC is doing? I wouldn't be surprised if they reroute Danny Green somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised if he latches onto a contender. But yeah, I would be happy with either. If I had to pick, I would probably say I would prefer Ibaka just because he's a big guy, and Anthony Davis obviously doesn't want to play center during the regular season. He wants to kind of preserve himself for the playoffs and stuff like that, where that's when he can really play center and really fully unleash the full potential of the Lakers offensively and defensively. So on nights that I think Davis, you give him a rest night or something, you can put Ibaka in there, and he's obviously not Anthony Davis, and he's not even what he used to be as a player, where he's not. I mean, I think he's more of a. He's still a good defender, I think, for the most part. He's just not the same type of defender that he used to be, where like that guy would just terrorize people around the rim because he's long, athletic, the defensive instincts and stuff. I do think instinctually he's still a good defensive player. He's just probably not that type of dude that's going to meet guys, 11 feet above above the ground and meet you at the apex when you're trying to go up for a dunk. But still a very good defensive player, can still space the floor for you and just do a lot of different things. And he's, a good physical presence as a big man. So I'd be on board with him for sure, even if it takes the full mid-level exception. I'd be happy with either guy. But, yeah, if the Lakers, say they sign Gallo and they bring back JaVale, re-sign Dwight Howard, and I don't know if they're going to be interested in bringing back DeMarcus Cousins as well. Maybe that's what they roll with their front court rotation. I would prefer to start Dwight instead of JaVale, but who knows what's going to happen with that whole situation. We don't even know if JaVale is going to opt in for sure yet, so we'll have to just kind of see what's going to happen there. But either of those two guys, I'd be thrilled, in all honesty. They're both very good players for very different reasons, and I think can bring things that would really help the Lakers in a number of different ways. So I'd be ecstatic with either. So
yeah, and as far as talent goes, this free agency class is obviously not very strong. It's Anthony Davis but I mean, it seems very, very likely, let's just say, that he's going to re-sign with the Lakers. Outside of him, there's a steep drop off in the free agency market. So, Ibaka and Gallo might be two of the next 3 or 4 most talented players out there. It's just a matter of, the money it takes to get them and fitting them with the roster, which, like we said, both of them, I think, makes sense, at least fit wise. It's just, I think the only concern is whether, spending the money on them is enough to get, the other necessary help you need around the roster.
Yeah, and I mean, the Lakers can explore the trade market as well. Like I said, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see them explore the trade market for Kyle Kuzma, because he is entering that last year of his rookie deal. My dream scenario, I think, which I mean, it's not like a out of this world thing. It's probably a little more difficult now that the Lakers' first round pick is on its way to OKC instead. I know that they were interested at the trade deadline interested in Kelly Oubre. And so I've always kind of had this thought in my mind that if they could somehow flip Kuzma and something for Kelly Oubre, because it was reported that the Suns had interest in Kuzma, which maybe, that was a point of discussion, but that was like a dream scenario. So I wouldn't be surprised to see the Lakers explore some options like that to address their need on the wing. Somebody in the chat said Mo Harkless. I think that's a quality option as well. The Lakers could probably get for fairly cheap. I think that they were probably interested in him on the buyout market, but he didn't want to be bought out, so he just stayed in New York. But that's another guy. I mean, those types of guys I think are who the Lakers are going to really look at to fill that void, get you guys, depth on the wing, guys that can either defend or shoot, ideally both. And, you got Anthony Davis, the true defensive player of the year. You could probably have 1 or 2 guys that aren't great perimeter defenders, knowing you have that insurance back there.
Yeah, definitely. I think the Lakers proved that they have a strong enough, defensive mentality and defensive awareness and just coaching defensively that they should be fine, hiding a guy defensively. Obviously, it changes a lot, I think, in how they play. They were so almost chaotic in how they played defense last year, and the speedy rotations and being able to help all over the floor. That changes a little bit when you have guys that aren't great defenders. But that part of it, I think I have quite a bit of confidence in Frank Vogel and the rest of the coaching staff, and obviously AD in your back line being able to figure that out.
Yeah, 100%. So. That's what it comes down to. Is Lakers are led by multiple individuals that you just trust them to figure it out. Frank Vogel, the coaching staff that he's assembled around him, and as far as I know, nobody's really been poached. There have been talks about Phil Handy possibly going to the Nets, but Phil Handy, it sounds like, is going to stay with the Lakers, which is huge. Great assistant and player development coach, and has a ton of respect around the league. I trust this coaching staff. I trust Rob Pelinka in the front office to assemble the right type of team. The buyout market, I think, is going to be something that will be big as well later on, because teams. I bet a lot of teams are trying to cut costs and not try to pay guys basically that can't really help them, especially if they're not looking to be competitive or stuff like that. So I think the buyout market's going to be a good place for the Lakers to add on to this roster later on. But they also have the benefit of they're the Lakers. The Lakers are officially back. The LA market, all that stuff, and they're a title contender. So you're going to get a lot of these guys that that will sign for probably cheaper than their market value. Especially if they haven't won a title, a lot of guys are going to latch on hoping they can get a ring and then go get paid. Ideally, when the NBA financially probably bounces back a little bit, hopefully the pandemic is over by the time this upcoming season is done and out of the way, and we have either the Lakers going back to back or a new champions crowned, and things just kind of start to get a little more normal. But yeah, so it's a fascinating offseason for sure for a number of different reasons. And free agency starts on Friday, right?
Yes.
I think it was like 2 days after the draft, which was just like no time wasted.
I believe 2 days after that is when the moratorium ends and the official free agency signings happen.
Yeah, so it's going to be fun, man. It's going to be chaotic. I mean, we've got the Rockets trying to trade Russell Westbrook, but apparently nobody wants Russell Westbrook, and there's rumors of James Harden wanting to go to the Nets, and like there's potential for this offseason. I feel like most offseasons we think going in that it's going to be pretty crazy, but this feels a little different given all the circumstances that are surrounding the league and the country and just everything that's going on. So it'll be really, really interesting to watch, and I'm excited. Hopefully the Lakers make smart moves and continue to build this roster. I think we're both optimistic about the Schroder trade. I know people have been asking about that in the chat, but yeah, I'm excited for what we've seen so far. So anything else you want to add before I guess we can jump into the chat a little bit and talk about some questions and comments that people have brought up?
I just want to say the Nevada Wolfpack are leading the Mountain West with a 4-0 record. Just wanted to bring that up.
Okay, well, I'm going to answer the chat by myself. I'm going to just kick Hani out of here. I gotta get Jacob in here. Jacob's
well, Jacob's just gonna talk about Indiana being 4-0.
Yeah, but that's fine though. they're not a rival, so it's all good.
They don't make inappropriate comments about their quarterback's name.
That is true. All right, first question we had was, how much would you be willing to give to Kentavious Caldwell-Pope?
A lot. Well, the thing with KCP is more than likely they're going to be able to hold on to his cap hold and his bird rights and be able to sign him after they're over the cap. So technically they can pay him to whatever they want up to his max, which, I mean, obviously he's not going to get his max, but I think it wouldn't shock me if the Lakers gave him a pretty big bag after the last few years of being here. His contribution to the team, obviously last year in the playoffs, being their third best player. And, him being the reason LeBron came to the Lakers, ? But I think 15 million is like the ceiling of what he can get. But I think probably about 13 million a year is something that I'm just kind of penciling in as I think that's about what he's going to get.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets it's really hard to gauge this free agent market. It really is, as far as long-term money and stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets a very substantial 1-year contract, because he's proven himself to be a very valuable member of this team. We kept saying he was their third best player in the playoff run, consistently third best player. There were not other nights it was different guys, but you could count on KCP to come through in the playoffs for this team, both defensively and offensively, and that's huge, man. That's huge. He's got a ton of value, and obviously he's a guy LeBron trusts, AD trusts, and I think you got to get him back. You got to get him back. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if he's asking for 4 years, $100 million or something like that, maybe not. But I think he's going to be in a reasonable price range that the Lakers can and should bring him back, because he's proven to be a very valuable member of this team. So.
Yeah, and I just saw a comment asking about how many years they would give him and whether that's going to be an issue with them trying to get a star next offseason. I think even if you give him, say, a 3-year deal, that feels like a tradable contract to me, where I wouldn't be concerned about, if they thought that they were going to be able to get Giannis or Giannis agreed to sign with them, that they wouldn't then be able to kind of swap that for whatever to clear up that space.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's just going to be interesting to see the length of that type of contract. And that kind of feeds into the next question that I saw was how many years will they give KCP? And basically asking if the Lakers will try to get a star in 2021. If there's anything we know about Rob Pelinka, it's been about maintaining flexibility with their salary cap space. Obviously, Anthony Davis is going to get his full max contract, and his is basically just a question of how long it's going to be, whether it's a 2+1, 1+1, 4+1, whatever it is. He's going to get whatever he wants. He's earned that. So as long as he's in purple and gold, you don't really care about that. KCP, kind of the same thing. I would probably lean towards a shorter term deal, just to maintain some of that flexibility moving forward, especially because the Lakers, Rob Pelinka's openly said that basically they want to get that long-term star to pair with Anthony Davis because LeBron is about to be 36 years old. And even though he's still, in my mind, the best player in the world, eventually, he's not going to be. And he's not going to be around for a ton longer. So you're going to have to find that next star to fill that role. And, I think the Lakers know that you're going to have to either do that via trade or you're going to have to do it via free agency because the Lakers pick situation, unless they just find an absolute steal at the end of the first round, because they do have some first round picks in the future because of the trade with AD was just some pick swaps with some of those picks that were included. But so they'll, it's tough to gauge the market, but I think that KCP's deal will still be kind of shorter term. I'd be surprised if it's more than 3 years. I would think it's 1 to 2 years because the 2021 free agent class was looking good, but maybe they're turning their attention to 2022. Obviously, Giannis Antetokounmpo is a free agent in 2021, but nobody really knows for sure what's going on with that. So, I don't know. I definitely think they're going to leave the flexibility open, though, for either 2021 or 2022 to get a star free agent when that time comes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, obviously, even the trade for Schroder kind of fits into that same timeline that, he's a guy on an expiring deal. If they do think that they're going to get Giannis or whoever else this offseason, they can move on from him. And like we said, I think KCP, as long as it's a reasonable deal, which I think it will be, say 3 years, 40 million or something like that. I think he's going to be tradable, that they could then offload his contract and still get that start if they are actually able to do that.
Yeah, and that's an underrated aspect of some of these player signings and contracts and stuff is if you get movable contracts, and that's what we'd been saying with Danny Green is I think a lot of people scoffed initially when they signed him that, oh wow, Danny Green for $15 million a year, but it's like that's a very movable contract if you're trying to upgrade your roster, and we just saw that today, trying to upgrade their offensive abilities, and they go out and get a guy like Dennis Schroder, who's a very quality player, a 6th man of the year type of guy, and so don't underestimate that aspect of player signings and contracts and stuff. Is that at some point some of those larger deals can be very movable when it's all said and done. So. All right, I think that was really it for the chat. A lot of the stuff was what we talked about. We had somebody ask, Honey, what your thoughts were on the Schroder trade based on your tweets. It's mixed, but he's, I guess, cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Plus, he has a great story about his bleached hair. It's got a gold patch in his hair now, too, and it'll fit really well with the purple and gold, so I'm in.
There you go. You got a little extra out of him. So good question. All right. We're going to get out of here. We'll be back on later this week. Maybe we'll do like a live pod or stream during free agency when it opens, because I'm sure you're going to see rumors flying in hot and heavy. There's been some talk that some deals are already done. They're just waiting to basically announce them. Wouldn't be surprised at all. I mean, the NBA is known for its tampering, and it's a matter of, do you get caught or not? As we've seen with the Lakers, sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't. So, but hey, it's going to be fun. I'm excited for this offseason. I'm excited to see how the Lakers add on to the championship roster that they have. and what moves they make to kind of shake it up a little bit and try and come back with a little bit different look and try and go back to back. So, but yeah, until next time, we will be probably off for a couple days. We don't really have the draft to look forward to anymore now. So unless the Lakers buy a pick, and if they do that, like they did with THT last year, we'll be there to talk about it. But we're definitely looking forward to free agency later this upcoming week, and we'll be back to talk about that. So be sure you subscribe and follow on YouTube and twitch.tv/Lakers Outsiders, and like us on Facebook. We'll be live streaming on all 3 of those platforms, and you can get all of our content on LakersOutsiders.com. Follow Hani on Twitter at HONIAHM for more mixed opinions on Dennis Schroder, and I'm sure he'll go back and forth on it. But you can follow me at Gary Kester. Yeah, it's gonna do it. I'm gonna, I don't know, go play video games over on my personal Twitch, and Hani's gonna, I don't know what Hani does. He's probably just gonna go look at Mountain West standings right now. So
it's the Wolverine meme, and I'm just staring at Mountain West standings. Yes, that's correct.
All right, we're getting out of here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. But until next time, this is Gary Kester with Hani Amani and the Lakers Outsiders signing off.
Shout out to Wes Matthews Sr.